My name is Antoine Poinsot. I work at Chaincode Labs, and today I'm going to talk about the consensus cleanup. The consensus cleanup is a soft fork proposal to fix bugs in the Bitcoin protocol. What I want to do today is to go over the main items in the proposal and explain their impact, the mitigations that I'm proposing, but leaving some time for questions afterward, because I don't think it's very interesting to go into the nitty-gritty details. If you want the details, I'm happy to discuss it in person, or you can find the BIP online. So most of the issues fixed by the cleanup have been known for a long time, most of them for over a decade. It's also not a new idea. The Great Consensus Cleanup proposal was initially proposed by Matt Corallo in January of 2019, so more than 6 years ago. It was later abandoned at the same time that Matt stopped working on Bitcoin Core. At the end of 2023, I was looking in this proposal and not reviving it yet. I was trying to convince myself that it was worth spending more time on and looking more in depth. Well, it turns out that what I found was that it was worth it. Later, at the beginning of 2024, I published some research on the various items in Matt's proposal. So looking into each bug, its impact, the proposed mitigation, and whether we could think about alternative mitigation and why this specific mitigation and not another, and also why we are at it if we want to include any other fix as part of the soft fork. So I published this in March of 2024. At the same time, I published research into the very worst block possible to be created according to today's consensus rules. So it's the worst case in terms of validation time. So in this thread, I studied the very worst case, but also the worst case in terms of an economically incentivized attacker, which is basically validation time over preparation cost to the attacker. These two threads sparked some discussions with a number of people, some of them in the room. Shores participated in these discussions. And yeah, it went steadily for 1 year, after which I think most people were on the same page, not every single one, but most people were on the same page and agreeing on a set of mitigation, which I went on and formally proposed as part of a BIP. So last month, I proposed a BIP to change the Bitcoin protocol to include fixes to these bugs. So I'll now go over the issues that I intend to fix. Well, me and Matt, because Matt is a co-author. The first one is time warp. Then there is these blocks that are slow to validate. I like to refer to the first two as vulnerabilities and the last two as more like weaknesses. And then, so time warp, expensive blocks, malleability in the transactions, and then duplicate transactions. All right, so I'll start with time warp. Time warp is a bug in the difficulty adjustment in Bitcoin, which enables a 51% attacker, a majority hash rate attacker, to significantly increase the block rate of in Bitcoin. So exploited to its full potential, it allows to bring down the difficulty to that of the Genesis block in 38 days, which is, at this point, the network would be severely harmed, because at this point you have just a gazillion chain at difficulty 1, gazillion blocks on every single chain. No more time locks because there's just so many blocks. No more resource constraints because resources are constrained by block space, which is restrained by block size, time, block frequency. That's pretty bad. But you might say, well, it's only exploitable by a 51% attacker. Isn't that already an assumption that we make? Well, not so fast. The threat model for 51% attacker in Bitcoin is a 51% attacker, as long as they maintain 51% of the hash rate, which is as long as they keep spending energy, they can censor transaction. Not more. It's not ideal, but not more. And they need to keep spending energy to keep censoring. What this bug turned this into is that a majority attacker that just maintains its hash rate for 38 days can just break the network. That said, I don't think it's very likely to happen because existing miners are obviously not incentivized to break the network. And so it means that it would have to be an externally motivated attacker to perform this attack. So most likely bringing up as much a hash rate as there is expense today on the network. I think what's more likely to happen is that given the current concentration of mining, miners might coordinate to exploit it to a small extent. For instance, to have twice as much blocks than today, a block every 5 minutes on average. And it would let them claim more block subsidy, effectively stealing the block subsidy from future miners, and it would let users have more block space. So it could be in the interest of short-sighted miners and short-sighted users who want lower fees to exploit this bug at the expense of the long-term health of the system. So I think that's more likely scenario. So how does it work? I won't go into the details, but just give the intuition. It stems from an off-by-one bug in the difficulty adjustment algorithm. You might think that on average, block must take 10 minutes in the Bitcoin protocol. Well, not exactly. It's because, well, and then every 2016 blocks, all nodes consider how long it took to mine 2016 blocks and adjust the difficulty depending on this. Well, actually, they consider how long it took to mine 2015 blocks. This is because they only consider 2016 blocks, which is 2015 intervals. Like if you have 4 blocks from 0 to 3, that's 4 blocks, and there is 3 intervals, 0 to 1, 1 to 2, 2 to 3. So it's off by 1. And it makes it so that the difficulty adjustment period do not overlap. The last block of a period is not the first one of the next, which means that they can have different timestamps, which means that an attacker can try to get the last block of a period to be as far in the future as possible, and the first block of each period to be as far back as possible, which means faking that it took a long time to validate to decrease the difficulty. And it turns out that with the current timestamp rules, an attacker can do so, which means basically the attacker is jumping back into the past every first block of a period. The fix to the time warp attack is basically what you want is removing the off by one, but that would be a hard fork. So what you're going to do is to tie together the difficulty adjustment periods. And so you do so by restricting the time stamp of the first block of a period to not be before the last block of the previous period, modulo some grace period, which we introduce for safety. That's it. It's just one tiny additional rule on the timestamp of the first block of a period. Next on the list, expensive blocks. All right, so those, my thread on the very worst block is private. It exploits bugs that at this point, a lot of protocol developers are aware of, but still I didn't want to make it public because it explains exactly how to craft such blocks, and I have scripts to craft them. And so I won't go into the details of how it's crafted, but I can say that the very worst block I could come up with takes 1.5 hours to validate on a Raspberry Pi and a few minutes still on high-end hardware. That's an issue just for the sake of making full validation accessible to people with lower-end hardware, but also and especially for miners' incentive, because it can create perverse incentive for miners to attack their competition, because while they're validating a block, the competition would be mining on a stale tip. And yeah, and given that even on very high-end hardware, it still takes minutes. Even if it takes like 10 seconds, that's still huge loss for a miner to just not mine for or waste hash rate for 10 seconds. So not ideal. I think the discussion was really focused on this point the last time Matt proposed the great consensus cleanup, because there's just so large a design space to try to restrain this, what comes down to basically a negative externality, right? You have transactions, and some users can impose a very high cost on all the rest of the network by their usage of Bitcoin. What Matt proposed was to disable some script functionalities. He proposed to disable a cut separator, find and delete, making scripts push only, a few of the things, technicalities. But basically, one of the pushbacks he got from this was notably from Russell O'Connor, but I'm sure others were in agreement as well. What if someone 10 years ago had created a pre-signed transaction that created an output that itself used this disabled script functionality, but this pre-signed transaction is time-locked, so this person cannot confirm it right now, and they deleted the private key. And it's completely far-fetched. Nobody has done that. But I think philosophically, we should go as far as we can to try to avoid invalidating or confiscating coins. So I looked into alternative mitigation that did not involve disabling script functionalities, and that's the mitigation I'm proposing for this bug. I'm trying to pinpoint exactly the harmful behavior, really exactly the negative externality, which is such as if a user gets his transaction made invalid, it's because they were trying to increase the validation cost in the first place. So that's exactly what we want, but nothing else. So, but as much as possible, because there's significant cost that you can impose on a full node. So you need to make some things invalid. Just trying to pinpoint it clearly. All right, next vulnerability, well, weakness. The Merkle tree. The Merkle tree construction in Bitcoin is completely broken. It was broken since the beginning. It was fixed somewhat in 2012 when it was found that it was already possible due to duplication of leaf nodes to create multiple blocks, different blocks with the same block hash. Not ideal. Turns out you can do exactly the same with 64 bytes transactions. You can have multiple blocks with different transactions. They have the same Merkle root. They have the same block hash. Not ideal. It has been an issue for full nodes. It was a network split bug in Bitcoin Core in 0.13 because the way it worked, it's implementation specific. But the way it worked in Bitcoin Core was that we would receive the first block with the transaction set malleated, be able to deserialize transaction, see, oh, that's garbage, it's invalid transaction, cache the result, this block hash is invalid, don't try to validate it again. Later, an honest participant in the network would share the valid block with us with a different set of transactions, but the same block hash, and we'll say, no, I already seen this block, it's invalid, network split. So it was fixed. It did not require a soft fork to be fixed. I'm trying to not overstate my case, but there's another issue, which is that you can go the other way around. Instead of hiding some transactions that were in the block, you can fake that some transactions were included in the block, but actually they were not. So you can fake Merkle proofs for transactions. That's an issue for SPV verifiers. For instance, wallets like Electrum validates SPV proofs. And then now you have all these new side systems like sidechains validate SPV proof, rollups validates SPV proof for pagans. So I had recently a discussion with someone working on a rollup that was not on mainnet yet, but they were vulnerable. Basically, you could create a fake Merkle proof for a transaction that was sending money to the rollup, and this transaction was never included in Bitcoin, but you could still claim the money on the rollup. So you could basically empty all the funds from the rollup. And it's just a massive footkin. It's just, yeah, well, because someone else using a 64 byte transaction, you don't have to use 64 bytes in transaction in your protocol to be vulnerable, right? You just have to implement additional checks when you validate a Merkle proof. So there is mitigations available without a soft fork today, but you need to be aware of them and you need to actually perform them, which might be inconvenient if you do them, I don't know, in a smart contract or whatnot. So my proposition is just make 64 byte transaction invalid. This transaction, which shows 64 bytes, cannot have an output that is not unspendable or spendable by anybody. So any 64 byte transactions create an output that is either can be stolen by anybody or it's just burning money. So it's not going to break any use case. It's just unclean because you have 61 bytes transaction, 62 bytes transaction, 63 byte transaction are all valid, useless, but valid. 64 byte transactions, useless, harmful. 65 bytes, useless, harmless. And it just creates this discontinuity, which is not great, but also we cannot change the Merkle tree. So it's the least bad solution in my opinion. All right, last on the list, also the least, I think, because it's not really something that can be exploited today. It's just, if we're going to clean up, I think it makes a lot of sense to try to get transactions on Bitcoin finally unique. Early on in Bitcoin, it was possible to have duplicate Coinbase transactions. And since any transaction in the system spends Coinbase transactions, it was possible to have duplicate transactions. Not ideal. You have a UTXO, and then you have another. They have the same TX ID. Well, the first one was erased. To fix this in 2012, well, Russell O'Connor found the bug in a very funny blog post called Midas Money. You can look it up. And Peter Waller fixed it with BIP30. But what BIP30 entails is for a full node, when they receive a block, to go through all the transactions and validate that there is no such transaction with the same TX ID already present in the UTXO set. It's not an insane amount of computation, but it's unnecessary. And also some more modern clients cannot perform this validation nowadays. For instance, U3XO would be, well, Taj told me might be able to do it, but that would be very, very, very ugly. So basically, yeah, U3XO cannot do it. So what we want, so later after BIP30, BIP34 was introduced to make transaction actually unique by forcing Coinbase transaction to commit to the block height, such as, since there is only one Coinbase transaction per block height, the block height is different for every single one of them. Every single one of them has different TX IDs. Therefore, it's not possible anymore to have duplicate transaction. So we were able to disable BIP30 validation until some point in the future, because BIP34 was imperfect and still left some room for duplicates. I won't go into the details, except if there is question afterward. I'm 20 minutes in. I think I've got a 30-minute slot, so we'll have good time for question. But basically, what I'm proposing is to commit to the block height -1 in the log time of Coinbase transaction, and this will fix. This will complement the BIP34 hack, basically. All right, so you can find all the details about this on my BIP. I opened a pull request to the BIP repository. This is this one, I should probably update my slides. I'll post my slide online and share them so you can click on the links. The delving threads I mentioned at the beginning, that's the general thread where we discuss all these issues. That's the thread where we discuss the details of the very expensive blocks, which is private. And yeah, I'm probably going to be talking a lot about this on Twitter for the next month, hopefully not years. So you can follow me there as well for updates. And that's it. I guess ask questions because I booked 10 minutes for these questions.
Thanks so much. I was just curious. I saw the 64-byte transaction stuff. Does that have anything to do with big int calculations, or is it just strictly the transaction size?
It's strictly the transaction size. The issue is that in the Merkle tree constructions, you have the tree. If you have leaves that are exactly 64 bytes, they may be confused for nodes of the tree, because nodes in the tree are just the catenation of two TXIDs that is itself hashed. So you can basically you could have the same block that has one row less, that is all 64 bytes transactions. Yeah.
My question would be specifically regarding the time warp attack. Could that be used long term to scale Bitcoin in any way to increase block throughput?
Yeah.
Like, do we want to actually patch that just in case hardware in the future just you can validate much easier, relay times?
Yeah. It can be exploited by miners to shove more blocks on full nodes without their consent. I don't think we should want to keep that.
I don't think so either. I just was asking.
Yeah,
You can
yeah.
do this on testnet actually, right? They have 3 million blocks in what, 9 years?
But sorry, I didn't catch the last bit again.
Doesn't testnet currently have an issue with being time warped attacked frequently?
Testnet has its proof of work intentionally broken, but time warp was fixed for testnet 4, but the proof of work is still broken because reasons. It can also be exploited by a majority of coordinated miners, which we probably don't want to incentivize to be created.
Thank you for taking up this work. I think it's very important, and I think it should be merged into Bitcoin Core. I also think covenants are important and should be merged. So if a covenant proposal did achieve rough consensus, would you be open to combining these bug fixes and doing a single soft fork?
I don't think there is a reason to combine them. Only maybe to try. I think combining them would be trying to sneak one into the other, at the mine or the covenant one. And I think any proposal should stand on its own merit. And there is probably a path to enable covenants as well, but it should be on their own with their proposal. And there is also no technical reason why we cannot have two soft forks to be activated, either one after the other, or also just at the same time. We can have multiple soft forks to be activated on the network that can be in parallel.
Thank you. So my question is actually related to the one just being asked. And so far, we've had two talks, and I think we have two great software candidates already. And I'm just curious, if you have any thoughts on like how to deploy this? What sort of mechanism would you prefer for maybe deploying this? Do you have any thoughts on a potential timeline? Those sort of things.
Yeah, I've not given it much thought, but my preference would be to use BIP9 with large. Basically, a bunch of time ago, Matt Corallo proposed modern soft fork activation for Taproot, which involved having going through the happy path of enabling through BIP9 having all full nodes, most of full nodes activate the soft fork, having miner signal for coordination of the activation without force signaling, but still have this escape hatch to coordinate around a forced activation, if necessary, a long time in the future. I think it's reasonable. I think if you were trying to refer to forced signaling, I think we should avoid this at all costs. Well, unless miners are trying to prevent us from fixing their possible exploits, where at this point we should probably force them and refuse their blocks. But until so, we should go through the happy path and avoid.
Fix that you proposed. So I guess 4 years ago, there was a block that took more than 2 hours to get mined. I guess probabilistically, over centuries, like you could have a block that takes 5 hours to get mined. To fix the time warp attack while handling random chance events.
Factor is for the other way around, actually. This is backward looking. It can take 1 day to mine the first block. It would just be a future timestamp. Future timestamp is what we want. We want to.
Sorry to jump back to another issue. I had a rebuttal to my question, and I think the bottleneck is on the social layer. So the reason I asked you about merging proposals is that it's got a very high coordination cost to get the entire network or nearly the entire network to agree to something. So if we can get the entire network to agree to 2 proposals, I think it makes sense to merge them, but that's not my proposal. So
I understand the argument. The argument for the opposite direction is, well, now you created a dependency on something else, so you need twice as much agreement. So there might be agreement to activate the cleanup without agreement on the covenants, and there might be agreement on the covenants without agreement on the cleanup. So I would be in favor to not bundle them.
So this is more of a thought, and I strongly agree with you about doing them separately. And I think, in a way, the Bitcoin soft fork machine is it's a very rusty machine. It's a machine that, in my opinion, lacks maintenance and lacks oil and lacks maybe even some parts. And I think perhaps a non-controversial soft fork like this, it's pretty minor stuff and it's strictly positive things. It shouldn't really be controversial in any way. I think this could be a great exercise in not only fixing these bugs, but also as a way of re-oiling our machinery, trying to actually get back into the ring and trying to do good soft forks a bit more quickly than we have done in the past.
Okay, I'll be a bit harsher on this one. I think if this reduces the bar to change Bitcoin, this is a good reason not to do it. Yeah, Shaw's asked and Rob.
This is more of a hint. What you can, since there might be some miners listening, do you want to remind them about doing the end lock time? Because the difference between this soft fork and a lot of other ones is that miners really have to run this not just on their node, but also on whatever other infrastructure they're using. Because otherwise, even if they signal for it, they might produce invalid blocks because they forget to set the end lock time.
Yeah. Well, if you're a miner, come talk to me. There is a bit more to it to make sure that, I guess it can be seen as hedging as well. It's not only miners getting ready to activate it. It's just in case users activate it, you might want to create blocks that are valid in this case. So they're just valid, either it activates or it doesn't. But yeah, miners, come talk to me. I would be glad to have a discussion.
And just an observation with the time warp attack. Definitely, if you're using time locks, right, block height time locks, you have this assumption that 140 blocks a day, right, 144 blocks per day, is this a case for, I guess, an epoch timestamp time lock if this attack were to be done because you're kind of anchoring in the past? So if you do an epoch timestamp, it may just take longer, but you're not going to have it happen sooner. So is it kind of like trading off between what risk you're more comfortable with if you're using time locks today before this gets patched?
Yeah. If you're using timestamp, your time lock wouldn't run out, which is interesting because this is due to the 2 hours rule for block validation, which is not exactly a consensus rule. So and without this rule, the network isn't secure. This rule says, well, there's 2 rules restricting timestamps on Bitcoin. The first one is median time passed. Take the past 11 blocks, the timestamp of the next block must be strictly higher than the median of the past 11 blocks. And that's a consensus rule because all nodes have the same timestamp. It's just based on the blockchain data that everyone shares. The 2 hours rule is just do not accept any block that have a timestamp that are 2 hours in the future compared to, and also it means that one block that was invalid at some point might become valid as your system clock moves forward. The system is broken. It's interesting.
Hi. It seems that a few of your changes could actually already be like soft enforced by Bitcoin Core itself without being a consensus rule. For example, it could not relay transactions that are 64 bytes. It could not relay blocks with timestamps that don't adhere to these rules. Or it could itself already put the height of the block height in the block time field and stuff like that. Are there already changes like that being proposed, or did you think about them?
Yes. Let me get a slide. For time warp, it's the case since version 29, which should be out Monday or Tuesday, soon, TM. For expensive blocks, turns out, sorry. Oh, no. Yeah. No consensus rule. You don't discourage blocks. It's just that miners using get block template from Bitcoin Core will set the timestamp such as it obeys the time warp rule. It actually obeys a stricter rule even. Expensive blocks, I really wanted to have a rule that was already covered by standardness, such as you can never create a standard transaction that would invalidate these rules because it makes it much safer to roll out a soft fork. It turns out my rule can be exploited, it can be triggered with very pathologically crafted P2SH redeem script with like just check sig drop. For any other type of transaction, especially normal transaction that people actually use, you would run into the standard maximum standard transaction size before anything. So it's really not a usage thing. It's more like if an attacker, after we put these rules, can relay a transaction with padded check sig drop, all the miners might mine a block with this inside. So we want to make those non-standard first, which is going to delay any potential activation. So I've got a patch. I don't know how to play this. I've got patched for this for a bunch of time now, and I'm not sure how it's strategic to open the pull request. For Merkle tree malleability, 64 byte transactions have been non-standard for 7 years, 8 years, something like that. Not used on the network. For duplicate transaction, miners need to set the block height -1 in the unlock time of their Coinbase transactions. However, well, I've got an open pull request to do that in Bitcoin Core, but miners do not use the Coinbase. Well, Bitcoin Core does not provide the Coinbase in the gate block template reply. Miners crafted themselves with their own fucking closed source software. So yeah, that's going to be the tough part. That's probably why shows shut out as well, because we really need to get into in contact with them. I've talked to a bunch of them, but there is some that are less reachable than others. Yeah, I'll just use StratMV to say it's short. And yeah, that's it.
Awesome. Put your hands together for Antoine. Thank you so much.